can't make my mind up about Whitney Webb. Whether she's actually an investigative journalist or whether she's a geopolitical architect and engineer and part of the machine, I can't make my mind up about her. But she's always right. But it's always after she releases a book. And then she's on all these platforms all over the place. I just can't figure her out.
Called PayPal Mafia, which have their tendrils deeply embedded in both parties. You may have Peter Thiel in Republican, but you'll have Reid Hoffman and Pierre Omidyar on the Democrat side, for example, and then Elon Musk also now on the Republican side. But really, these are people that build de facto monopolies in direct connection with the U.S. national security state. If you look at Palantir, it's very clear they care very little about our constitutional rights and freedoms, perhaps. The rhetoric they may espouse publicly. And, it's very unfortunate that so many people believe with how they frame themselves rhetorically because it goes very against their actions. For example, Peter Thiel is often referred to by others as a libertarian, but this is someone who says that he doesn't like free market competition because competition can negatively impact profits and ultimately promotes the idea of, quartering a market and building a monopoly. And when he's done that, which he has, he's done it in direct collaboration from the very beginning with the U.S. national security state. So I would not call that libertarian. I think it's quite clearly fascist. Clear if you look at, just American politicians in general over the last 100 years plus, they tend to serve their biggest donors, correct? And are influenced by their donors, and that's why, follow the money has always been so important when you're reporting on political realities or political figures in the United States. And I think it's abundantly clear that J.D. Vance has those kind of very deep connections to Peter Thiel, and his political career and his venture capitalist career would not have existed if it were not for him. And it's also important to point out that after the vice presidential announcement, you have close allies of Peter Thiel, whether it's Elon Musk or David Sachs or Palmer Luckey or Palantir itself, a Palantir co-founder alongside Thiel named Joe Lonsdale, all beginning to dump millions of dollars per month in the same super PAC that's supporting the Trump-Vance ticket only after that VP announcement was made. So clearly there, it seems like that particular network is quite convinced that Vance is going to be their guy.
Meet your new crush. Canadian Club Lemon Crush.
Where's Wally? The yellow, where's Wally?
When in office, and it's worth pointing out that a lot of these guys are very interested in dominating the digital financial system to come. For example, Elon Musk says that he plans to turn X, Twitter, into half of the financial system. And J.D. Vance has been on the Senate Banking Committee. He's involved in crypto regulation legislation that's being written and drafted and going to be put before Congress. And it's very likely that he'll be involved.
In other words, that's going to be look at the data centers they're building. Obviously, they're building banks. It's a blockchain system. Right, all those data centers and all the fibre optics and shit going everywhere. Right, it's a blockchain system, and if you don't behave yourself, you get locked out of the blockchain. Your wallet will get locked up on you. And you will never be able to catch it because it'll be forever changing from database to database and somewhere in the fibre optics. Marinus Link much. It's the global banking system. And it is centralised. It'll be in the hands of Twitter X. So anything on any digital platform anywhere that they don't like, she's a bit worried about this guy, let's lock him out of the system until he comes and hands himself in to answer some questions. That's what's going to go on there. No one ever have to come and get you. Eventually you'll get hungry enough. I better go in to see these guys so I can get my account unlocked.
And choosing the kingmakers of that,
My Gov unlocked.
PayPal PayPal's very own recently launched stablecoin, and any of these others, companies and currencies that they're, intimately connected to. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have heard about the move into central bank digital currencies, for example, or CBDCs, and there's been a lot of criticism around those because of the idea of it being programmable, surveillable money. But for money to be programmable and surveillable, it doesn't necessarily have to be issued by a central bank. It can be also issued by the private sector, and you can add that same type of Orwellian surveillance, the concerns about programmability, deciding what you can or can't buy based on various metrics, or, based on your online activity or the claims of a coming social credit system and all of that. You can have that issued by the private sector, no problem. And so there's been efforts to sort of to make a digital dollar in the United States, and there's been concern that there would be a CBDC in the United States, and that's certainly been happening in other countries, but I think in the United States it's increasingly unlikely, especially considering that the Federal Reserve in the United States is essentially owned by the private Wall Street banks. And if you're, a central bank digital currency, then the central bank is doing a lot of the job that Wall Street banks normally do. And Wall Street banks want to keep the two-tier system of private banking and central banking as it exists today. So they're most likely to be the issuers of that currency. And I think PayPal, in some of my recent reporting on my website, Unlimited Hangout, have focused a lot on how there's efforts by these groups that are either ex PayPal or who currently own PayPal to have PayPal and a lot of the companies that are intimately connected to it, for example, like Latin America's Mercado Libre, to be the rails on which all of these digital currencies will run, and to essentially dominate the field. And it's very likely that PayPal's PYUSD is going to be a major contender in that. A lot of, other dollar stablecoins may be as well, like Tether, which was intimately tied up with the FTX scandal, or Circle, which has a very intimate relationship with Larry Fink's BlackRock. Any of these, but essentially which, digital dollar coins are going to win, that's not going to be all be determined by regulation legislation that's being written and has to be approved first, right, by the Senate Banking Committee on which J.D. Vance sits. And so, having these particular Silicon Valley figures all tied to PayPal influence him, I think in that context, is somewhat, significant, because regulation determines the winners and the losers in the market that it's regulating, right? And so, if the people writing the bill all have ties to the same companies that want to be winners, they can be favored, at the legislative level, and, have their, work cut out for them essentially and come to dominate the market. And, PayPal has expressed for a long time they want to dominate the market. You have Peter Thiel on record saying that PayPal was created to replace the US dollar. So there's a lot of things happening here, and what you'd have, as a consequence of that, would be the people that run PayPal who, in recent years have just been censoring people for things they've written and stuff like that. They're the ones that would be capable of programming and surveilling your money, and that's very unfortunate, especially when you consider the connections of someone like Pierre Omidyar, who owns PayPal right now, which I wrote about in Press several years ago, and I know that Max Blumenthal also did an investigative series for MetPress on our Pierre Omidyar. That's very important. I would encourage people to look at those to learn more about the people that are essentially running this company, and also the other people that make up this particular network that is very connected to the so-called PayPal mafia, and really the PayPal co-founders. I mean, the intelligence ties abound. A lot of them frame themselves as pro-constitution, pro-freedom, and all of this, but a lot of their business decisions reflect something else entirely. And I think it's important to warn people about this.
I mean, knowing all of this, how do we even begin to explain this mass rallying by working class white Americans that support Trump and his campaign, despite them caring so much about civil liberties, freedom, and their amendment rights, as they say, while ignoring Trump's ties to the very establishment they claim to be against?
I think some of it might have to do with, the other weekend's events, the attempted shooting, things like that really rile people up. And I think regardless of whether one thinks an event like that is inorganic or organic, it doesn't really matter. The powers that be at the end of the day, when the American public, or really the public of any nation, is very emotional and very riled up, they're more easy to manipulate, and you better believe that they make efforts to sort of use that emotional energy to nudge people in a particular direction. That's something people should consider there. And I think obviously, that's going to, it seems like it's had the effect of sort of rallying people around Trump and making them, his supporters, much more enthusiastic than they perhaps were before. About his candidacy. And I also think a major factor, too, that we can't ignore is the fact that Peter Thiel is a major funder of independent and alternative media. Not Mint Press, not me, and definitely there's plenty of other journalists who are not funded by Peter Thiel, but a lot of the biggest names are. For example, when Tucker Carlson went independent from Fox, he entered into talks relatively shortly thereafter with Peter Thiel, who was going to finance him. I'm not sure if that's confirmed or not. But it's definitely, worth considering, especially since Tucker Carlson was one of the major people lobbying Trump to select J.D. Vance as his vice presidential candidate. And of course, Peter Thiel is a major investor in Rumble, which is an alternative.
Here's some brilliant news for adults who have difficulties with spelling, reading a newspaper, or
To YouTube.
Rumble is basically, it's MAGA. Rumble is MAGA. I don't see much libertarianism on Rumble. No, I call it Grumble. Because it's full of grouches.
That tends to appeal mainly to right-leaning audiences, and a lot of the figures on there, the biggest names anyway, many of them are all in on this particular ticket, and receive some sort of financial compensation. Thiel funded Rumble to post their videos there. Obviously, that's not true for everyone that's in the contractual situation. For example, Jimmy Dore recently had me on to talk about how awful Peter Thiel is for over an hour, but there certainly are people that I think inclined to criticize him. I mean, he is a very powerful figure, and a lot of people in media, unfortunately, are funded by him. And there's been sort of this increased, effort to sort of, well, we've seen it for a long time, like with The Intercept, for example, and Pierre Omidyar are sort of launching this sort of what was framed then as this dissident outlet. These billionaires sort of coming out and framing themselves as the saviors of journalism. We've seen that more recently with Elon Musk and, the Twitter files and his efforts, his claims of buying Twitter to turn it into a free speech platform, though I would argue that his motives are something else entirely, and he's essentially said that they're, the main factors were something else. So he wants to bring back his original X.com, which is what he brought to PayPal back in the late 90s when he and Peter Thiel teamed up. He said he wants it to be half of the financial system. He wants to turn essentially what was Twitter into a bank. And his other ambition, I would argue, is to hoover up all the user data to train his AI. He has an AI company that produces the Grok chatbot, which is now integrated into Twitter and, of course, is a competitor, to OpenAI's ChatGPT and all of that, but it can, have unique access to all of that user data. I would argue it's for, algorithmic training. And other things as well. And then another one of his ambitions, as he said, is to verify all humans on the platform, which means linking your government-issued ID to your social media account, which is a part of this broader effort that includes PayPal and also the FBI and the Secret Service and Israeli intelligence to end online anonymity, specifically on social media networks, and prevent people from using an anonymous account or really having any sort of privacy online, period.
Yeah, well, we have Masayoshi coming to Australia, who is the Bitcoin guru. Who owns SoftBank, Japan. I thought it was quite interesting that Marinus definitely gave me the I can't deny that because you're on the money confirmation without saying yes. he kind of turned into a puddle. Now, Marinus knows more than they're telling us, and that's all part of it, and so is Lockheed Martin. Now do you understand why they're spending $86.5 million on a court? Oh, they're doing this and they're doing that, and yeah, I know. But have you asked yourself why? Why do they need such an extravagant court in a little place like Burnie? Because those who have never been anywhere, you're not going to get it. I've lived in Adelaide. I've lived in Victoria. I've travelled around a little bit up in the mainland. I spent 6 years in the mainland. 1995-96, I lived in Adelaide, and they don't have a courthouse as big as what they're building in Burnie. Not for just magistrates and the Supreme Court. They're putting a skywalk across from the police station to the courthouse. So you can be picked up, processed and sent off to Risdon or wherever the new jail's going to be, or within a matter of hours now, and your family will be sitting there wondering where the hell you are. Hey, since when does a cop give a shit about getting a message to your family? They don't give a shit about letting your kids know whether you're going to come home or not when they take you from your house and just leave the kids there by themselves. That's what they did to me. Or just because I questioned jurisdiction. So at what point is Service Tas going to get shut down out of all this? Because you know it's going to, because everything's going to go digital. It's all going to be automatically done. Service Tas, you're going bye-byes. Centrelink will probably go bye-byes. And everything will be done through MyGov. And to sort a MyGov issue out, you're probably going to have to go to the damn courthouse. They'll either switch your account back on or you'll go for re-education. That's kind of how I'm seeing it going. This is like they say. She's a slippery slope. Once you start sliding, you accelerate. Did you know that? When you slip, you accelerate the whole time. That's why it's called a slip. She's a slippery slope.